We know them for their endless energy and the comforting laugh tracks of America's favorite sitcoms. But behind the bright studio lights, these 12 iconic actors were facing a horrifying reality. While we watched them live out perfectly scripted lives on our screens, they were privately suffering from some of the most aggressive, unforgiving diseases known to medicine. From rapidly spreading cancers to devastating cognitive decline, their final days were anything but a comedy. Who were these household names, and how did they manage to hide such immense pain from the world? Number 1. Elizabeth Montgomery. When you picture Samantha Stevens, you immediately think of that famous nose twitch. On Bewitched, it was a simple, elegant gesture that could instantly fix a ruined dinner party or banish a meddling relative. For 8 seasons, Elizabeth Montgomery projected a kind of effortless suburban magic into millions of American living rooms. She was the charming, invincible witch next door. But in the spring of 1995, the reality she was dealing with behind closed doors couldn't be waved away with a sound effect. Montgomery had been feeling exhausted and severely unwell while filming a television movie. Instead of stopping, she pushed through the rigorous shooting schedule, chalking her symptoms up to the flu or just the general exhaustion of a demanding production. That instinct to keep working to prioritize the schedule over personal health is deeply ingrained in television culture. You show up, you hit your marks, and you don't hold up the crew. By the time the production wrapped and she finally underwent a thorough medical examination, the diagnosis was colon cancer. It had already progressed well beyond the point of medical intervention. What stands out about Montgomery's final weeks is how fiercely she managed her private reality. In an era where celebrity medical crises were increasingly becoming tabloid fodder, she completely shut the press out. She didn't want the public to watch her physical decline or consume her illness as entertainment. She chose to go to her Beverly Hills home, shutting the doors to spend her remaining time strictly with her family. She passed away just 8 weeks after receiving her diagnosis. For the public, the whiplash was severe. Because she had kept her condition entirely hidden, fans went from watching her eternally youthful and vibrant in daily reruns to reading her obituary almost overnight. There was no prolonged public vigil, no media circus. The contrast was sharp and unsettling. A woman whose defining television persona was built on having absolute magical control over her environment taken down rapidly by a reality she simply couldn't outmaneuver. Number 2. Robert Reed. Mike Brady was the bedrock of the idealized American family. On The Brady Bunch, he was the dependable architect with the reassuring voice who could solve any adolescent crisis with a measured conversation in a wood-paneled den. For 5 seasons, Robert Reed projected a vision of fatherhood that was safe, predictable, and perfectly tailored to suburban sensibilities. The reality of the man wearing those meticulously ironed suits was entirely different. Reed was a classically trained Shakespearean actor who frequently clashed with producers, finding the sitcom's scripts frustratingly superficial. More profoundly, he carried the immense pressure of living a deeply closeted life. Working in the early 1970s, coming out meant the immediate end of a mainstream television career, a risk multiplied tenfold for an actor whose entire brand was built on portraying the ultimate traditional family man. That pressure to hide only intensified when Reed's health began to fail in the early 1990s. He was diagnosed with colon cancer, which advanced aggressively. However, his medical situation was far more complex. Reed was also HIV positive. At the time, the public stigma surrounding the virus was immense and the tabloid culture was notoriously ruthless. Reed found himself fighting a two-front battle, enduring the physical devastation of terminal cancer while desperately trying to keep his HIV status out of the papers. He restricted his final days to a very tight circle of trusted friends and castmates, terrified that a leak would destroy the wholesome legacy he had spent decades building, a legacy he often resented, but ultimately felt compelled to protect. He passed away in 1992 at the age of 59. The contrast remains difficult to process. The man who sat at the head of television's most transparent, problem-free dinner table spent his final months navigating profound physical agony, carrying a secret he believed his audience would never accept. Number 3. Valerie Harper. Rhoda Morgenstern never had it easy. On The Mary Tyler Moore Show. Valerie Harper built an entire career playing the underdog, the brash headscarf-wearing New Yorker who had to fight for every date, every apartment, and every ounce of confidence. She was the messy, deeply relatable foil to Mary's polished perfection. American audiences connected with her instantly because she made everyday struggling look endearing, wrapping her insecurities in perfectly timed sarcasm. The struggle she faced decades later, however, offered absolutely no room for a punchline. In early 2013, doctors discovered cancer cells in the fluid surrounding her brain, a rare condition called leptomeningiocarcinomatosis. The medical consensus was blunt and immediate. She was given roughly 3 months to live. Usually, when a veteran television star receives a timeline like that, the industry quietly prepares for a swift private exit. Harper did the exact opposite. She took her diagnosis public almost immediately and actively dismantled the expectation that a terminal patient should simply fade from view. She gave interviews, continued acting, and even joined the physically grueling cast of Dancing with the Stars. For the viewing public, it was an awe-inspiring display of grit. But behind that highly visible resilience was the exhausting, unrelenting physical toll of continuous, heavy medical intervention. What makes Harper's final years so fascinating to analyze is how she navigated the intersection of terminal illness and celebrity. She essentially had to perform her own survival for a national audience that was constantly waiting for the inevitable. The media tracked her medical updates with a strange mix of admiration and morbid curiosity, treating her prolonged survival like a multi-season television arc. It is incredibly demanding to just be a sick patient in private. It is an entirely different, heavier burden to function as the country's symbol of defying the odds, while your nervous system is actively deteriorating. The 3 months she was given ultimately stretched into 6 hard-fought years. There was no neatly written 30-minute resolution. Instead, Harper endured a drawn-out, highly publicized physical decline, demonstrating a stubborn, unglamorous endurance that far exceeded any character arc she ever played on screen. Number 4. Bea Arthur. It was impossible to ignore Bea Arthur. At 5'9", with a commanding baritone voice and a deadpan stare that could freeze a room, she never just entered a scene, she owned it. Whether she was breaking political ground as the fiery Maude Findlay or anchoring a chaotic Miami household as Dorothy Zbornak on The Golden Girls, Arthur projected an impenetrable, almost intimidating kind of strength. She was the immovable object of American television. You simply couldn't picture someone with that much sheer force being vulnerable. Her characters were defined by their ability to yell down injustice, talk sense into fools, and handle whatever mess life threw at them with a perfectly timed, withering remark. That indestructible screen persona made the reality of her final days feel particularly jarring. When Arthur was diagnosed with lung cancer, she approached the disease with the same fierce independence that defined her career, but she turned entirely inward. For a woman who spent decades delivering some of television's loudest, most piercing comedic dialogue, she orchestrated her exit with absolute silence. The press was firmly locked out. There were no public statements, no farewell interviews, and no medical updates. She flatly refused to let the public watch a disease strip away her autonomy. The outside world only truly understood what was happening when news of her passing broke in April 2009. There is a deep, unsettling irony in the nature of her decline. Lung cancer is a disease that systematically suffocates, literally taking away a person's breath and their ability to speak. To realize that the booming, authoritative voice that anchored 2 distinct eras of sitcom television was slowly extinguished behind closed doors is difficult to reconcile. She chose to endure that physical collapse out of sight, ensuring that the audience's memory of her would remain focused on the towering, unbreakable woman on the screen, rather than the quiet, fragile reality she faced at the end. Number 5. Fred Gwynne. Fred Gwynne spent a significant portion of his life trying to escape a 50-pound costume. As Herman Munster on The Munsters, he wore heavily padded suits and 4-inch asphalt boots, enduring miserable heat under studio lights to deliver pure slapstick comedy. He took a classic horror archetype, Frankenstein's monster, and turned him into the most gentle, gullible, and endearing patriarch on television. American audiences looked at his towering 6'5" frame and saw an indestructible, bumbling giant. For decades, Gwynne relied heavily on that massive physical presence. Even long after he shed the green makeup, he used his formidable stature and booming voice to command the screen, famously intimidating Joe Pesci as Judge Haller in My Cousin Vinny. He was an actor who controlled the space around him through sheer size and stamina. That makes the reality of his final months particularly hard to reconcile. In early 1993, Gwynne was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. This specific disease is notoriously insidious. It does not announce itself. It hides quietly, presenting vague symptoms until it has progressed completely beyond the reach of surgical intervention. It bypasses any opportunity for a prolonged medical standoff, moving with a rapid, unforgiving efficiency. For an actor who had always been the biggest, most imposing figure in the room, the sudden loss of physical agency was swift. There was no extended media coverage or drawn-out public decline. Gwynne retreated entirely to his farm in rural Maryland, keeping the press at bay as the illness rapidly compromised his body. He passed away only a few months after his diagnosis, just 8 days shy of his 67th birthday. There is a stark irony in his departure. The man who spent his most famous years playing a reanimated immortal creature, a character defined by physical indestructibility, was taken down by a biological reality he couldn't see, fight, or outlast. He vanished from the public eye almost as quickly as he got sick, leaving audiences to grapple with the fragility of a man who had always seemed built like a monument. Number 6. Bob Denver. If you turn on a television anywhere in America, there is a very good chance you can still find a man in a red shirt and a white bucket hat running frantically across a tropical beach. As Gilligan, Bob Denver was practically a live-action cartoon. He was physically elastic. He could fall out of a palm tree, get hit in the head with a coconut, or sink into quicksand and completely reset by the next commercial break. He portrayed a character who was entirely immune to permanent damage. But a human body cannot reset like a sitcom script, especially after decades of heavy smoking. Long after the cast of Gilligan's Island had permanently cemented their place in American pop culture, Denver's physical reality began a harsh and irreversible decline. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, he was facing a cascading series of medical crises. First came a quadruple bypass surgery to address severe heart disease. Then, in 2005, came a diagnosis of throat cancer. For an actor whose entire comedic timing relied on frantic, high-pitched vocal delivery, throat cancer is a uniquely cruel disease. The necessary treatments, often involving intense radiation or invasive surgery, directly attack the instrument of the trade. They leave the patient incredibly fragile and can fundamentally alter their ability to speak. Denver didn't hide away entirely. For years, he had traveled the country warmly, greeting generations of fans who felt a deep, nostalgic connection to him. But the man attending those later events was visibly worn, carrying the heavy, exhausting burden of continuous medical intervention. The manic energy of his youth had been drained by the sheer mechanics of trying to stay alive. In September 2005, his compromised immune system finally gave out, and he passed away from severe pneumonia stemming from his cancer treatments. The dissonance for the viewer is profound. We are left with the looping image of a man permanently frozen in time, endlessly bouncing back from every disaster on a fictional island, while the actor himself was slowly worn down by a relentlessly fragile human reality. Number 7. Ted Knight. Ted Baxter was the patron saint of unwarranted self-confidence. As the pompous, intellectually vacant news anchor on The Mary Tyler Moore Show, Ted Knight built an indelible character out of sheer vanity and bluster. He was loud, physically imposing, and entirely obsessed with his own reflection. Audiences loved him precisely because he projected a booming, impenetrable arrogance that was impossible to take seriously. That commanding energy wasn't just a character choice, it was the engine of his entire career. Even a decade later, anchoring his own sitcom, Too Close for Comfort. Knight was still heavily relying on that robust, slightly frantic physicality to carry the show. He was a performer who fundamentally needed to dominate the space he was in. This makes the nature of his decline particularly jarring to analyze. In 1985, right as his sitcom was being retooled for a new season, Knight was diagnosed with colon cancer. The television industry operates on a ruthless schedule that rarely accommodates human frailty. There is an immense unspoken pressure to prove you are still viable to show the network and the audience that you can still hit your marks. Knight attempted to navigate this brutal expectation. After undergoing surgery and grueling treatment, he forced himself back onto the soundstage to shoot new episodes. He tried to muscle through the pain, putting the makeup back on to project the vitality that the sitcom format demanded. But biology eventually overrides ambition. The cancer returned aggressively, spreading through his lower body. The man who thrived on being the loudest, most animated figure in the room was systematically stripped of his ability to perform. Production on his series had to be permanently suspended, forcing an abrupt end to his professional life. He passed away in the late summer of 1986. The dissonance here is rooted in a sudden loss of control. Knight built a massive television legacy, playing men who desperately craved the spotlight and operated under the illusion of their own invincibility. Yet he was ultimately forced away from the cameras, unable to command the one instrument he had always relied on: his own body. Number 8. Donna Douglas. If you watched television in the 1960s, your image of Donna Douglas is likely frozen in a very specific, highly kinetic state. As Ellie Mae Clampett on The Beverly Hillbillies. She wasn't just the beautiful girl in the mansion. She was a physical force of nature. She wrestled chimpanzees, carried oversized critters, and possessed a kind of invincible, sun-drenched vitality that felt distinctly American. For 9 seasons, Douglas projected a picture of absolute, uncorrupted health and endless energy. That visual was so potent that she essentially carried it for the rest of her life. Decades after the sitcom wrapped, Douglas remained a highly visible fixture at fan conventions and autograph shows, greeting people with the exact same bright, unwavering Southern charm. She understood perfectly well that for millions of older viewers, she was a living time capsule of their own youth. The expectation of maintaining that radiant, wholesome energy, even as she entered her 80s, was simply part of the unspoken contract with her audience. The reality of her final months broke that illusion with ruthless efficiency. In late 2014, Douglas was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. This particular illness offers practically no room for a prolonged medical standoff. It attacks the body's core ability to process nutrients, systematically draining away muscle weight and energy at a frightening speed. For a woman whose entire public identity was rooted in physical robustness and country-strong vivacity, the mechanics of this disease were a harsh reversal. Douglas chose to retreat to her home state of Louisiana, completely out of the media spotlight, to manage this rapid physical collapse in private. She passed away on New Year's Day in 2015, only months after the illness took hold. The contrast is difficult to shake. We are left with the permanent looping broadcast of an endlessly energetic tomboy who could out-wrestle anyone in the Ozarks, running in stark opposition to the quiet, rapid depletion she faced behind closed doors. Number 9. Suzanne Somers. For an entire generation, Suzanne Somers wasn't just a television star. She was an industry of eternal youth. As Chrissy Snow on Three's Company, she defined the bubbly, carefree California blonde of the late 1970s. Audiences watched her bounce onto the screen every week with a kind of weightless, untouchable energy. But long after she left the sitcom, she pivoted into a role that was far more demanding. She built a highly lucrative empire selling the promise of perfect health marketing, everything from fitness equipment to alternative medicine. She positioned herself as living proof that with the right discipline, a person could essentially halt bodily decline. That meticulously curated brand of invincibility is exactly what makes her long medical history so compelling to analyze. Somers didn't face a sudden, out-of-nowhere diagnosis at the end of her life. She endured a grueling, intermittent, decades-long standoff with breast cancer. She first confronted the disease in her early 50s, and from that point forward she was forced to navigate a profound contradiction. The sheer endurance required to project total physical optimization while your own cells are actively turning against you is hard to overstate. She had to manage the draining reality of cancer therapies while continuously smiling under the bright lights of home shopping networks and promoting books about anti-aging. She had to conceal the messy, unpredictable nature of a compromised immune system to protect a multi-million-dollar brand built entirely on physical perfection. While she was very vocal about her unorthodox approach to medicine, the daily exhaustion of a cancer that simply refused to stay in remission was largely kept hidden behind the polish of her marketing campaigns. In the fall of 2023, the disease finally overtook her, claiming her life just a day before her 77th birthday. Her departure forces a sobering realization about the limits of human control. A woman who spent over 20 years trying to aggressively outsmart aging. Convincing millions they could do the exact same thing was ultimately taken down by a biological reality that simply could not be bargained with. Number 10. Estelle Getty. Picture it, Sicily. Sophia Petrillo was the undisputed anchor of The Golden Girls, because her mind was a steel trap. She was the matriarch who remembered every slight, every colorful detail of her past and possessed a razor-sharp wit that could dismantle anyone in the room within seconds. Estelle Getty won an Emmy for playing a woman whose greatest weapon was her absolute, unwavering cognitive clarity. Audiences adored Sophia precisely because she represented a fearless, unapologetic aging process where the mind remained perfectly intact. But the reality creeping into Getty's life during her later years on television offered a deeply unsettling reversal. Even while still working on the series and its subsequent spin-offs, Getty was dealing with intense, paralyzing panic on set and an increasing inability to retain her dialogue. The industry, and even her castmates, largely wrote this off as severe chronic stage fright. They didn't know it was actually the early stealthy onset of Lewy body dementia. This specific neurological disease is notoriously difficult to diagnose and incredibly unforgiving. It doesn't merely erase memories like traditional Alzheimer's. It aggressively attacks motor functions, triggers severe cognitive fluctuations, and systematically strips away a person's fundamental grasp on reality. To maintain the illusion of the quick-witted Sophia Getty had to mask profound internal confusion and terror under heavy layers of old-age makeup and the demanding rhythm of sitcom comedy. When the diagnosis finally became clear, she was forced to retreat completely from public life. For an actress who built a beloved national persona on rapid-fire comebacks and vivid storytelling, the mechanics of this illness were particularly cruel. Her family had to watch the vibrant woman who once effortlessly commanded massive studio audiences slowly lose her connection to her environment and her own identity. The irony is heavy and difficult to ignore. Millions of viewers still tune in daily to watch her flawlessly recount highly detailed fictional tales of 1920s Italy, entirely unaware that the woman delivering those lines would eventually be robbed of the ability to remember her own remarkable life. Number 11. Bill Bixby. If you look at the trajectory of American television in the 1960s and 70s, Bill Bixby was the ultimate anchor of sanity. Whether he was trying to hide an alien roommate on My Favorite Martian, raising a young son on The Courtship of Eddie's Father, or desperately searching for a cure for his own monstrous transformations in The Incredible Hulk. Bixby consistently played the rational man surrounded by chaos. He projected a calm, measured intelligence. Audiences trusted him completely because he always seemed to have the situation, no matter how absurd, firmly under control. That need for order wasn't just a screen persona. It defined his entire professional life. When he transitioned behind the camera, he became one of the most prolific and reliable directors in the sitcom industry. He was a man who understood the rigid, demanding mechanics of television production better than anyone thriving on the responsibility of running a busy set. In 1991, that absolute control was disrupted by a diagnosis of advanced prostate cancer. The disease is incredibly taxing, often spreading to the bones and causing a kind of deep structural agony that makes even simple everyday movements excruciating. For someone whose entire livelihood was built on managing the fast-paced, high-stress environment of a soundstage, the physical limitations imposed by the illness were a massive hurdle. What makes Bixby's final years so remarkable to analyze is his stubborn refusal to step down. He was serving as the primary director for the hit sitcom Blossom when his condition began to aggressively deteriorate. The industry expectation in these scenarios is almost always immediate retirement. Bixby rejected that entirely. He continued to show up for work even when the relentless cancer treatments left him severely depleted. Toward the end of his life, when he was too weak to stand, he actually directed episodes from a sofa that the crew brought onto the stage. He forced himself to project authority and focus, carefully masking the profound physical toll the disease was taking to maintain a sense of normalcy for his young cast. He prioritized the weekly broadcast schedule over his own rest. Bixby passed away in late 1993, just days after leaving the studio for the very last time. The contrast is profound. An actor who spent decades playing characters frantically trying to contain uncontrollable situations, spending his final days using every ounce of his failing strength to hold a sitcom set together. Number 12. Kirstie Alley. When Kirstie Alley walked into the titular bar on Cheers in the late 1980s, she completely altered the atmospheric pressure of the room. As Rebecca Howe, she was a glorious contradiction, a fiercely ambitious corporate manager who was constantly and spectacularly falling apart. She was physically uninhibited, entirely unafraid to look ridiculous, and projected a massive, chaotic energy that easily dominated the screen. For decades following the end of the series, Alley maintained that loud, unapologetic presence. She was a celebrity who seemingly lived her entire life out in the open, willingly bringing the public into her personal struggles and various career pivots. She was a permanent fixture in the cultural conversation, always talking, always highly visible. The American public felt they knew exactly who she was because she rarely seemed to keep anything behind the curtain. That established decades-long transparency is exactly what makes the reality of her final weeks so difficult to process. In late 2022, after seeking medical attention for what she believed was simply severe back pain, Alley was given a devastating diagnosis: colon cancer, and it had already progressed exceptionally far. The illness moved with an aggressive, unforgiving speed. For a woman who had built an entire public brand on being brashly communicative and totally unfiltered, her response to this terminal reality was a complete and immediate reversal. The doors to her life were firmly shut. She chose to endure the rapid, exhausting physical decline in absolute secrecy, allowing only her immediate children and closest family to witness her deteriorating health. She passed away in December 2022, only a very short time after the cancer was discovered. Because she had kept her condition completely hidden from the press and her fans, the announcement of her passing felt like a harsh, abrupt interruption. The viewing public was forced to grapple with a sharp dissonance, a performer whose defining characteristic was an overwhelming, indestructible vitality, quietly dismantled behind closed doors by a disease she refused to let anyone watch.